Welcome back. Here's video 2. This one is going to be focusing on the Constitutional Convention. Now, originally, this was not called the Constitutional Convention. It was called the Philadelphia Convention, or the Convention of 1787. Not simply because we didn't go into this convention thinking that we were going to create a new system of government. So the Constitutional Convention is basically tasked with one thing. They need to revise the Articles of Confederation. Now, we know now, because we don't have the articles, that eventually, as this discussions got heated in the convention, they decided to just scrap the whole Constitution or the whole Articles of Confederation and draft a new system of government. So we kind of look back on this now and say, oh, well, of course we were going to come up with a constitution, but that wasn't really the case. There were lots and lots of different plans and compromises that were made and were proposed. Alexander Hamilton, if you guys have ever listened to the Hamilton soundtrack, when he goes to the Constitutional Convention, he proposes this whole brand new system of government that he just created in his head. So there were lots of different people that proposed different suggestions. The big plans that we're going to talk about, one of them is the Virginia Plan. And this was proposed by a guy named James Madison. You may have heard of him. And this plan called for a bicameral legislature, so 2 houses, and it called for representation in the legislative branch to be based on population. So the larger states in this plan were going to have more of a voice in the legislative branch. The New Jersey plan was proposed by a guy named William Patterson, and that was with 1 T. And his plan called for a unicameral legislature, which means 1 chamber, and he called for equal representation. So it doesn't matter how many people live in your state, everybody's going to have the same representation in Congress. So people go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and eventually we have this thing called the Connecticut Compromise. And sometimes this is also called the Great Compromise. Either one will work for me. But the Connecticut Compromise basically took parts of the Virginia and the New Jersey plans and smushed them together. So the Virginia plan, from the Virginia plan, we take the bicameral legislature. So we have 2 houses. We also take the concept of representation based on population. So in the House of Representatives, which is one of the chambers proposed in the Connecticut Compromise, we have representation based on population. So if you're a state like California, you get like 53 members of the House of Reps. If you're a state like Alaska with not a lot of people living there, you get 1. So that's what we take from the Virginia plan. The New Jersey plan kind of gives us the equal representation component. So equal representation in the Senate. Doesn't matter how many people live in your state, everybody gets 2 senators. Another compromise that was made during this during the Constitutional Convention dealt with the issue of slavery. So you have to think in the 1780s, our country is very divided when it comes to the issue of slavery. The South still used slavery very heavily, the North not so much. So when it came time to discuss that issue of slavery, the South basically said, look, if you don't put something in there to protect slavery, we're not signing this. And the North was like, well, we don't want slavery at all, so we're not going to sign it. So we had to have this compromise. So what happens here is that the 3/5 compromise is adopted. And it tells the South that they can essentially count 3/5 of their slaves for representation purposes. So if there's a slave owner living in the South and they have 100 slaves, then they can count 60 of their slaves towards the population of their state. They're not like made citizens or able to vote or anything like that. But that's pretty much where that comes from. Okay? Any questions on that stuff? Let me know.